Welcome. I'm Ryan,
I'm Margaret.
and we are fish and game employees out here at Round Island, where we come. We got here in mid-April, and we'll stay to mid-August. And yeah, we are looking out for Pacific walrus, stellar sea lions, and a number of colonial seabirds. We do monitoring. We make sure to minimize disturbances, and what else do we do?
Oh yeah, we also have campers that come out during the summer for stretches of 5 days at a time to come view walruses and sea lions.
So I had a question. So Margaret, what's the most difficult aspect for you spending the summer with the walrus?
It's pretty good. I
Weather?
already wore out a pair of boots, hiking boots.
Yep. We've had some rough weather in the past week, and I guess it's hard to be away from family, where it's a pretty remote island. It feels like being out in a lighthouse or being a lighthouse keeper. Sometimes, but there's lots of walrus to keep us company,
And we get campers.
and we get campers. And if you have any interest in coming out here to camp, check out the Fish and Game's website. We have plenty of spaces available. We have a question about if we see the same number of walrus from year to year. It varies, and this year in particular, the numbers have been very low. And actually, it's some of the lowest numbers on record. And looking back through our data, you'd have to go to 1998 to find equally low numbers. And 1998 happened to be a strong El Nino year. Ocean temperatures here in Alaska are 2 to 4 degrees warmer this year, I think, due to that El Nino phenomena. And that may play into it. You concur? So the research techniques. The question is, what research techniques do we use to study the walrus? Primarily, we're doing daily observations, and we do those at a random count time. It's either 9 in the morning, 2 in the afternoon, or 5 in the afternoon. If there aren't any walrus on the beach, we'll go down there, and we have a bunch of little vials.
To collect scat. When he says observations, he means we're observing them, but we're also counting them.
You want to go grab one of those?
One of what? The vials?
Yeah, we can show you guys some walrus scat if you like, and I think that gives researchers an idea of what they're eating, and are all of our techniques non-invasive? All of our techniques are non-invasive. The USGS does studies where they'll radio tag walrus, and they use the tagging technique. They shoot them with a crossbow, and then implants the tag into their skin. Here is some walrus scat. We'll get 2 samples of those. We also collect tusks that are either beach cast, or we remove them from deceased animals on the beach. And we donate all those tusks to the Chiastic Walrus Commission, and then they are auctioned off to local craftsmen in March in Dillingham, Alaska. Can you hear that?
No.
Oh. So the next question is, will walrus travel as a herd when they return to the ice? And that's a good question. I know that the walrus are the most gregarious of the pinnipeds, meaning they love hanging out with each other. They've been observed feeding together, and I think more or less they will stay in a group when they head to the ice. I'm sure there'll be some stragglers, some rogues, but that's a good question, though. I would check with the USGS fellows and see if they've got any data showing that. they do travel together. And the next question is, will they meet up with their family or find new mates? Yes. It gets interesting because they will go onto the ice and then they will have their little contest to see who is the dominant male, and whoever that dominant male is will mate with multiple females. So when you say new mates, if a new male comes up the ranks, there will be new mates for him. And so here's a good question for Margaret. How long can a walrus stay at sea at one time?
When the walrus leave here to go out to feed, they typically go out for 4, 5, 6 days and come back, and they'll often go all around the same time, and so they'll sort of leave in pulses and come back in pulses, but I think they can possibly stay out longer because they can sleep at sea as well.
That's right. They have a pharyngeal sac behind their head and in their back, and they can inflate that, and that's also the source of the chiming that you may have heard. But yeah, they can stay out to sea for weeks.
The pharyngeal sac is like an air bladder that they use as a buoyancy control device, and they can inflate it and use it to float while they're sleeping. Keep their head above water.
Yeah, so it seems like, I think normally they'd be out for a week, come back for 2 to 3 days, head back out 5 to 7 days. Okay, the next question involves the walrus bosses, or the lumps on their necks. Do these bosses serve any purpose? Yes, they do.
They are. I think they're a secondary sexual characteristic, as in the ladies think they're attractive, and they may also be scar tissue from fighting. They get more as they get older.
They are. It's like an added source of armor for their necks for jabs and such. Like their skin's quite thick. Their skin can be 40 millimeters in thickness, which is about a inch and a half, inch and a quarter. And in addition to their skin, they'll have these bosses that are essentially made up of the same material that the skin is made up of, and it's just an extra source of protection. And it definitely differentiates the pale, bumpy neck of a male. It's quite different from the smooth, furry neck of a female. So it definitely identifies who the male is and who is ready. So the next question is, do walruses with broken tusks lose status when it comes to prime space on Round Island? And we've observed that the biggest males with the biggest tusks seem to have the pick of their spot, and they can kind of roll up on the beach and jab their way to comfort and a good night's sleep, or a good day's sleep. I am not sure if they lose status if they break their tusks. I've seen fellows do pretty well with just one tusk. Have you seen anything that would indicate that?
No.
Read the next question? Or, sorry. Well, I guess one thing to add about tusks, that was a good indication. I guess it was a common misconception that walruses use their tusks to dig out clams. But then you would see the walruses with broken tusks be just as healthy, just as fat, with no tusks. And so now, by this point, everyone is probably well aware that the walruses use their vibrissae, their whiskers, to detect the clams, and then a jet to blow out the mud around the clams, and then a suction. They suck the clams out. And another interesting thing is walrus are known as like keystone species here in Bristol Bay. Just the process of them going down, digging up the clams, sucking out the clams. It basically it just churns up the bottom sediment. There's like scraps of food. They help every other creature within the biome, if you will.
And then they bring those nutrients up to the beach, basically, which leaches back off and feeds fishes, which feed birds, and feed the grasses on the island with the birds.
So in recap, they kind of, when they go for clams, they mix up the bottom sediments while foraging, and then they can kind of create new microhabitats from discarded shells, and they generate food for seafloor scavengers from uneaten scraps of prey. That's what I just read. Okay, the next question. I saw 2 walruses in the water who seemed to be sparring with their tusks. Do they ever hurt each other? Are tusks sharp? I think that all the sparring that's done here on Round Island is kind of just a play fighting. The big battles will occur on the ice during mating season, and that's when it gets real. That's probably the most likelihood of them hurting each other. Also breaking off tusks. Here I don't think it's as serious, and I think if a walrus jabs another fellow, for us it looks like super violent, super aggressive, and it is. I'm sure a lot of force is generated, but with their protection, with their thick skin and their thick blubber and those protective bosses, I think it might just be like, move over. I think if you break off a tusk, they can get sharp, and then some of those broken tusks might lead to some superficial flesh wounds. But in terms of, what was the question? Hurt each other? I think in terms of hurting each other, it'd be pretty minor. Just and then here on Round Island, the walrus will come basically to heal wounds from the winter, molt their skin, get rid of all the bugs that are biting them. They are infested with a certain type of louse. It doesn't really affect their health, but I think with them molting, it gets rid of that bug. And so they need the warm temperatures, so the blood will come up to the skin and heal all their wounds. Okay. The next question is, what is the purpose of chiming? Which is an excellent question. Do you care to speculate?
The chiming noise is made by them moving the air in their pharyngeal sac. It's usually done in the water or underwater. I don't know what the purpose of it is. Maybe to impress ladies up north, but there's no ladies here, so.
It is a beautiful sound, and we read that I guess during the mating season, walrus have the most vocalized, not mating dance, but kind of the build up to impressing the women. Courtship display. They have the most vocal courtship display, and that's a good one. I'll write that question down and get back to you on that one. But the exact purpose of chiming, that's great. Let's see, how have things changed in the area of the new hull out this year on Cape Greg? Well, Fish and Game pushed back the fishery boundary by 1 mile. Oh, it's actually this one up here. So there's commercial fishing in Bristol Bay. That commercial fishing is for salmon, and it's now open. There's a fishery in Dillingham on the Nushagak River. The next one over is in Kwijak Bay, and there's Naknek, Egegik, and Ugashik, and Cape Greig is located between Egegik and Ugashik. And the Ugashik border next to Cape Greig has been moved a mile away from the walrus, and so hopefully the fishermen will be compliant and not disturb those walrus. A thing to add to that is that walrus are dispersed all throughout Bristol Bay. The haulouts are here, north of us, in Cape Pierce, Cape Newenham, and south of us at Cape Seniavin. Cape Greig is very similar to Cape Seniavin in terms of it's a beach, a big long beach, and on the Aleutian Peninsula, Alaska Peninsula. And there's also some new haulouts down by Unamak. I apologize if I mispronounced that. And they've been also hauling out near us in Hagemeister Island. Let's see. So the question is, how many did you choose there? Yeah, so I guess to answer your question is there's some new rules not allowing fishermen near that area. And so here's the next question is, as a follow-up to the statement that you collect tusks, are these tusks that they have lost in fighting with each other? On the beach cast, so we'll walk the beaches and look for tusks, and sometimes that's from a dead walrus that popped up in the winter, and like the wave action knocked a tusk out. A lot of times in the older tusks, when they forage, the front end of their tusks will wear down just from sand abrasion, and that is a weak point if they're trying to use their tusks to get up on ice or on rocks, or if they do hit another one, it'll break at the abraded point. We don't often see tusks from. I don't think we often get tusks from them fighting each other and then banging the tusks with another walrus. I think that may happen when it ramps up during mating season. And then are these tusks? And then other tusks, if we do get a dead walrus on shore, we'll go down and remove the tusks from the body, from the head. Margaret, do you get emotionally attached to the walruses?
We like the walruses a lot. They're hard to tell apart, and there are pitfalls in trying to imagine that you recognize a certain walrus. But there are a few that we can recognize by their scales, or scars, not their scales. And we see those ones over and over again. Imagine where they go when they go feeding.
I definitely miss them when they're not here.
Yeah.
The young ones are pretty cute, and the old ones are pretty cute. And my favorite is when they're in the water. They're just amazing in the water. On land, they're kind of clumsy, and they're encumbered down by their weight, and I think they're doing the best they can on the land. But once they're in the water, they're just
super agile.
They're super agile. So yeah, I'd say an emotion I feel towards walruses is love.
The next question is if their tusks grow back, and if they break them off. And so walruses' tusks are growing for their whole life, and they're growing like a fingernail would from the inside, or like a beaver's tooth from the inside and growing out.
Yeah.
I thought you were about to show some material. So yeah, they do continue to grow their whole life. And if one is broken off, say halfway down, it's possible that it broke off at the gum line and then has been growing out for a few years. And there's a full 6 inches of tusk inside their skull at all times.
Okay, moving right along. Once more. So, how deep can walruses actually dive for clams? Pretty deep. Pretty deep. I'm just kidding. They're shallow water divers. I think the waters here in Bristol Bay, it's all continental shelf, so it's not very, very deep. They dive for about 6 to 10 minutes, and they dive down up to 150 feet. I think, yeah, like about 90 to 150 feet is the bottom profile. This map here shows, this is probably going to be hard for you guys to see, but this is all continental shelf underneath the Bering Sea. And here's their main feeding areas. Here, 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 and here. That probably doesn't come through the video, but yeah, they about 150 feet is about as deep as they'll go. And that's where all the clams are.
And tunicates.
And tunicates.
And invertebrates.
It's not just clams. They like soft shell crabs and worms. Other bosses, hard or fat deposits in their neck. So it's skin. It's made up of the same material as skin. And one neat way to think of it, walrus skin is most like another animal on Earth, and that animal is the square-lipped white rhino. So it's very similar to that. So if you can picture rhino skin, which I'm sure all of you can, I guess it'd feel a lot like that. There's usually scarring on the distal end of those bosses, so the outside end, and that scar tissue might be a little bit harder than the rest of the skin. Okay, here's a great question. When the walrus clam, do they digest the shells or expel them? They never eat the shells. They're able to suck the foot of that clam right out of the shell. And they know this. They've done stomach content studies, and they never find shells in there. And then I think they're able just to suck it right out. Very efficient. Actually, not efficient. They leave a lot of food left, but that helps the other little critters down there. Margaret. Do walruses have a lot of taste buds on their tongue?
That's a great question.
I'm going to write that question down and get back to you. We have a great source of information is the Ecology and Biology of the Pacific Walrus by Francis Bud Fay, who came out here to Round Down in the 50s and basically just wrote the book. And here's the book. So hopefully that we may be able to look into that question about taste buds. But we'll do that. I have a list of questions that we'll have to answer after this talk. Okay. The walruses move so well in water. This is the question. But so clumsily on land. Can you contrast the muscles, body parts in the walrus used to swim versus these on land? Are they the same and different? I think the key point to that question is buoyancy. And they're massive animals. They can weigh up to 2 tons, and just when in water, their weight is so much more supported than in land. And it's pretty interesting in land. You'll see them move. They'll put the fore flippers up, they'll put their gut up, and then the hind flippers, and then repeat. So they're
Whereas in water, we have some viewpoints where when the light's good, you can see them from above swimming, and they do these beautiful things with their hind flippers, sort of. They have a couple of different moves, but if you can imagine, it's really different than watching the sea lions, for example, swim.
Yeah, and they have just their flippers are huge control surfaces, so once in the water, they're so maneuverable just with hydrodynamics as opposed to land where they're just they have got to succumb to gravity like all the rest of us. And also to add to that question, so you're asking us to contrast the muscle body parts of the walrus. So I'd say their flippers are great for swimming. They're all right for walking. Actually, they're not that good for walking. And it's somewhat similar to the puffins and the murres that you see here. You see them fly, and their little wings are just like beating as hard as they can, and they look kind of like little wind-up toys. And again, above water, they're somewhat inefficient. Instead of walking, they're flying, so it's aerodynamics versus hydrodynamics. But once these puffins are underneath the water, their wings are primarily designed for swimming underwater. And if you guys are ever in Alaska and get a chance to go to the Sea Life Center in Seward, they have a spectacular pool where the puffins will dive down, and you can go on the bottom floor and actually watch them swim. And it's just it's quite the contrast. It is almost analogous to a walrus walking on land and swimming in the water. Shout out to Sea Life Center. The next question, does part of the walrus study include monitoring their food sources, clams affected by warmer waters? Would this be a reason for the large new haul-out at Point Grieg? Better eats there. We do not monitor anything under the water. Because it's a sanctuary, we're not allowed to go in the waters, or we're supposed to basically, we leave everything be. But I can tell you that Bristol Bay is super productive. I'm not sure of what studies have been done recently, but I think they're just super highly productive waters. And the question about them going to Point Grieg to get clams, that's a possibility. I'll write that question down to see if there's any if anyone's doing any clam surveys. But good question. But no, we don't do those. So the next question, you want to read that one?
If a female comes to the island with the males, does she just get in the group and rest? Or do they make her leave? And how often does this happen? It's never been documented. As far as they know, it's never happened.
Keep your eyes out. Or we suspect it's highly unlikely. I don't want to say that there's never been a female here. But I've never seen it. It would have to be a very, to differentiate, it would have to be a pretty old, an adult female. So the criteria would be big, long, slender tusks and a smooth neck. There's a bit of sexual dimorphism with walrus, meaning the males will be much bigger. The same aged males will be much bigger than the similarly aged female. And so you'd have to spot a younger looking walrus with longer tusks, and that maybe people could keep an eye out for that, but I think it's pretty unlikely. I think to back up what Margaret said, it hasn't been documented in the decades we've been keeping records out here. All right, the louse. Thank you for talking about the louse. Can those louse survive in frigid waters? Yes. Do they lose them because of the sun or the molt? They lose them because of the molt, but the molt is made possible because of the sun, and also their gregarious nature. They need to reach a certain temperature to allow the blood to suffuse to the skin, and in order to heal the wounds and shed off their outer layer. So in the molt, it's their hairs and the epithelial layer of their skin, so just the outside of their skin.
So when they're warming up on the beach, that's allowing the blood to move to the outside so they can generate new skin underneath, and then they're rubbing against the rocks and rubbing against each other and rubbing off the old skin and the old hair. And if you've been watching since the beginning of the summer, they've been gradually changing a little bit to a brighter pink.
Yeah, and it's interesting with walrus. The older they get, their skin loses pigmentation. So younger walrus will have very brown skin and then relatively thicker hair. And as they get older, they lose pigmentation in their skin and they lose hair. And then their necks, the bosses, there's hardly any hair on their bosses. So keep an eye out for hairless walrus. It's happening.
When there are no walrus on the beach, as Ryan said, we occasionally go down there to look for beach cast ivory and stuff. And when you get down there, it smells really walrusy. And the stones will all be stained a red color. And you can even see that on the camera sometimes. And that is their molted skin coating all the rocks on the beach.
And
fur. And scat.
How well do the younger males integrate into this established round island group? Very well, as long as they stay out of the way of the big boys. We had a question this morning on the chat board saying that someone had observed more younger fellows last year than this year, and that may be a function of just our numbers are lower this year. And then right on cue, a little fella popped out of the water. And when I say little, they usually will come down here between 3 and 4 years of age. They need their mother's milk. So here's a picture of a little guy with the mother, so that little guy will nurse the super fatty milk from the mom, and then once he or she is finished milking, then they'll start looking for clams. And then in the case of the males, they will come down here and hang out with the rest of the boys. And was there any more of that question? So I think they do all right. There's definitely a hierarchy in terms of best location, and it may not be so much as the best part of the beach. It might just be he wants to get in where he's just touching everyone else and able to get his temperature up really high. What other islands or parts of the mainland can we see on the cams? Well, from the cliff camera...
I was looking to see.
The main beach camera, you can see Round Island. But the cliff camera, you can see... do you remember what you can see?
Black Rock is the one little one that's in the foreground, or the closest up one, and then there's High Island and Crooked Island are sort of superimposed on each other. They look like one land mass, but they're also visible back there. And Summit Island.
Yes. The only two islands you can't see are the Twins, which are amazing.
They're smaller.
They're way out to sea, and they're just covered in murres. Let's see. What is the guess when the boys will ditch the island and head back to their other lives with the wife and kids? So, anytime in the fall, I think it may depend on the sea ice, but I think last year they were gone in October. So, late September to mid-October, and they'll try to meet back up with those guys in the fall, and that coincides with the freezing of the seawater and the ice edge coming south. So the females and the children will come south, and the males will go and meet them. Do archaeological groups ever come to the island to reopen and expand past digs? And if so, have they found anything extraordinary? They haven't returned, and I think that's a budget issue. But they definitely have found extraordinary things, just artifacts dating back 6,000 years. 2 distinct groups of people living here. For me, what really was interesting reading all the archaeological notes is we have all these depressions in the land where they had their lodges, their barabaras, and to this day there's still petrified walrus tusks that they use for camp tent stakes. It's cool. That would be a fun blog. It would be fun to get into more of the archaeological information.
All the tent platforms we have here are built over depressions that were house sites.
Let's see. The next question was, I was at Cape Seniavin last week. Do you have any evidence that any of the walrus from Round Island have moved to Cape Grieg or other haul-out sites? We do not, but the USGS tags the walrus, and they were basically looking at the problem of disappearing sea ice, and they're basically studying foraging activities. And if I can put this on the screen, here is Cape Seniavin, and the blue indicates they're at the water surface, and they're probably swimming, and the red is when they're deep down and they're actually doing foraging. So here's a foraging map. To answer your question, I'll write this down. We could talk to the USGS guys and see if they have them coming up here. But I think from the literature I've read, they do go from haul out to haul out, and they're all over Bristol Bay, and they're also going to Russia. And
I think one of the next questions was whether we tag them, and we don't, but USGS does.
Do you guys agree with having walrus in captivity and doing tricks? If it's an orphaned walrus and he can't be returned to the wild because it was saved by humans, like, I guess I would agree to have that walrus put into an aquarium for the rest of its life rather than being euthanized. They're super intelligent. There's that Point Defiance is another group that helps us out. They're down in Tacoma, Washington, and they have an incredible video of, I think the walrus's name is E.T., and she goes through a whole bunch of vocalizations. I mean, I never would say go catch a walrus and put it in an aquarium, but these orphans, I think it's a valid option.
It's definitely educational for people who can't get themselves to places where walruses are. There's a thing when they do have an orphaned pup and they're raising them in captivity, if it's been separated from its mother, the walrus calves are so dependent on contact, 24 hours a day, touching other walruses, that walruses that don't have a mother or don't have walruses to be around all the time, while they're young, they need to be touched by humans their whole time. So kangaroo care for walrus calves. And I've heard that's a thing you can volunteer for if you live somewhere near an aquarium that might have a walrus calf.
If you are in and about or near the Seward area, contact the Sea Life Center because they need babysitters if there's a walrus. And I know the Sea Life Center is like the first care. They'll take in the orphaned guy and then and actually it's not a clearinghouse, but they'll send it to other aquariums. But yeah, and I guess back to that last question, studies do show that there is walrus go from haul to haul out within Bristol Bay. So if you see one at St. Even, there's a good chance that they'll be here sometime during the summer. Our walrus tagged for ID? They used to. One technique is they'd have a hose clamp and try to epoxy that hose clamp around the tusk, but I think they didn't have much success with that. The walruses can generate a huge amount of force, and I think popped a lot of those off. And they tried to paint or mark them, and that was unsuccessful as well. The feds have done a good job figuring that out with marking them with their radio tags. And are the pink ones the young ones? No. The young ones will be really brown. They'll have a nice coat of hair, and their skin pigmentation will be pretty brown. I guess we just addressed this in an earlier question where as they age, they will lose pigmentation in their skin and they'll lose hair. And so the pink one's kind of the older fellows that are molted and they're just hanging it out for the world to see. The skin. Let's see. The question number 34. Are they feeding now to get themselves through winter? And what percentage of their weight do they lose over the winter? That's an excellent question, and yes, they are feeding themselves now. I think, do you know how long they go? When they're mating, I think they're not eating.
I'm not sure.
It's similar with the sea lions.
Mm-hmm. But they're not mating for the whole winter.
They're not mating for the whole winter. So they definitely do a bit of fasting in the winter. And because I think they're so focused on spreading their genes that they don't eat. What percentage of their weight do they lose over the winter? That's going to go down on the list of questions. That's it. I couldn't answer that with any accuracy right now. I would guess 10 to 20%. But I would have to go reference this book really quick. Or not really quick. I'll have to look through this book and find it. But great question, and I'll get back to you. So we'll definitely, these questions that I've written down, we'll post them on the chat board. What is their main food source without the clamming sites? They love soft-shell crabs, tunicates, worms.
Sea squirts?
Sea squirts.
And sea cucumber kind of things?
Sea cucumbers. They are not fast enough to catch fish, so most of their prey is invertebrates, marine invertebrates. Though 10% of male walrus have, they found seal meat in their stomachs, and I guess the theory is that they've never been seen. It'd be hard to imagine them catching a seal, so I guess the theory is that if they find a dead seal, they will suck the flesh off its bone. They will eat it. And I don't know if they'll chew it or if they'll use the same technique with clams. But so I guess hopefully that answers your question. Okay, so Margaret, besides the walrus and the occasional fox sighting, are there any other creatures that you observe on the island?
I've been waiting for this question. Um, we also count sea lions daily at the East Cape. There's a year-round sea lion haul out, and we both really like going down there and watching them. They're really different than the walrus.
And they're stellar sea lions,
Stellar
which
sea
are
lions,
the biggest sea lions out of all 7 types of sea lions in the world.
And they're a part of the Western Alaska or stellar sea lions have 2 main populations, and these are the western ones, which are an endangered species or on the endangered species list, and it's just really special to get to go watch them every day and count them. And whereas we're kind of having a low year for numbers on walruses this year, we had a really big year for sea lions this year on the East Cape.
Yeah. In the 1990s, they had an 85% population decline, so it was a huge population crash. And I guess researchers are trying to figure that out, why that happened. We also do colonial seabirds, so we will do phrenology on black-legged kittiwakes, pelagic cormorants, and common murres. And that's really interesting. So we have certain plots that have been established throughout the years, and we'll check the date of the first egg, the date that those eggs hatch, and then the fledgling dates. So when the chick leaves the nest, and that's pretty interesting to see. You kind of grow attached to the little chicks, and we also do daily observations of flowers and any other seabirds we see, any other, whales we see. We had a ton of gray whales. I guess one could be a ton. We had many gray whales come by during their annual spring migration, and that lasted between, we saw gray whales from March 23rd to May 26th, and then there's a few humpbacks, and I forget who took the photo of the humpback breaching from the cliff cam, but it almost looks photoshopped.
And we also, to the best of our ability, try to track the songbirds that come through. In the spring, a lot of birds migrated through that continued on up to the Arctic to nest and breed, and then there's also a lot of passerines or songbirds that nest here in the willows and in the grasses, which we try to photograph and write down the date we first see them.
And so question 37 is, where will you each work after this season on Round Island? I will spend about a month working on the report, and then I will do sea lion work. There's a bunch of aerial photos, and there's a bunch of remote cameras that I work with and put up. I would put up a couple on Cape Newenham, and basically we go through tens of thousands of photos looking for marked sea lions, and then some aerial photos will be down in southeast, and that's just also looking for brands, and then there's also aerial surveys above St. Lawrence Island, and I think those are population counts. So I will be in an office. I think everyone wants to hear what Margaret does.
I probably won't work for a while. Well,
hustle backpackers.
Yeah.
Margaret's a sailing charter captain down in the Caribbean. It's awesome. Do any of the walrus die from sharks and whales, or mainly just old age? There has been killer whales. There's been recorded. Grab that.
Might be stuck to the wall.
Killer whales will kill walrus. Though it's not that common of an occurrence.
And I think it's only the transient orcas that typically attack marine mammals. This is a photo that's on our wall. The text isn't the first.
2006. And that's
This was at Round Island, and the photo is of orcas chasing a group of walrus and another group of walrus taking off in a different direction.
Yeah, I know there are other, I guess polar bears will prey on them as well, and they kind of use a technique that they'll try to scare a big group, and hopefully they'll trample some younger ones or some weaker ones, and the polar bears will go in there and eat them. There's a great YouTube video of a walrus fighting back, and it actually jabs the polar bear, and it succumbs to internal injuries.
The polar bear does.
It'd be nice if everyone could get along. But I'd say just old age. A lot is old age, unless they're sick, and but mainly just old age.
There's a certain amount of legal walrus hunting that happens in Alaska. And there's also a certain amount of illegal walrus hunting that happens in Alaska.
Which
by humans.
Which kind of leads into the next question. Last summer we saw what appeared like rockfalls causing walrus to startle and head off the island. Have there been any major disturbances that we've witnessed this summer? And we really haven't. And that's kind of thanks to everyone respecting the 3 nautical mile perimeter around the island. And in the past we've had low-flying small airplanes fly over the island, and that my first year we saw a disturbance of 1,200 walrus off the beach, and it was pretty impressive, but definitely deadly for those walrus who might get trampled. But this year, I think the only disturbances we've had have been unknowns, like maybe and small. There hasn't been big disturbances this year, which is nice because of the paperwork. Do walruses forage together as a group, or do they go their separate ways while looking for food? Yes, they do. They do forage as a group, and that's been observed before. And again, there'll be some guys that go off on their own, but I think they have been seen foraging in a group. Are there any recordings available of walrus sounds, courtship displays? Available for purchase. I'm gonna. Yes, there are. I think again that one of the neatest walrus sounds is if you go to YouTube and look up Point Defiance Aquarium E.T.
I think the last time I got it, I just typed in walrus vocalizations on YouTube, and yeah.
But we have some underwater sounds here on the island, and maybe we could throw up a link. Because that chiming, especially with the hydrophone, pretty neat. And then, but I can look into that for you. Is being assigned to Round Island for the season considered hazardous duty? Only in the helicopter. Like, the only time that we can put hazard pay down is when we're flying in the helicopter. Safety is paramount to our work activity here, and it's whenever we have to go down and either adjust the camera and that we're on the rocks with the camera, we have fixed lines that have been established, and so we're always roped up when we're off the trails. And when we have campers here, we make sure that they stay on the trails, because a lot of the cliffs are these big grass tussocks that are undercut, and they're you see rock slides happen a lot. And
we try to keep track of each other as well. If one of us got hurt, say at one end of the island, it would be on the other one to figure out where they were and call for help, which could be 8 hours away.
Yeah, we have VHF radios and such, but yeah, if a camper got hurt, we'd have to call the U.S. Coast Guard in Kodiak and have them send a helicopter out. And I think best case scenario, them coming and leaving, it would be 8 hours to a hospital. So yeah, safety first. Do you have any interesting stories of encounters with any walrus? I would say definitely we have a boat, and then we'll do full island surveys, and it seems like the second you kill the engine, you're going to get a walrus coming up to you. And it seems like it would be really neat, but it's kind of terrifying in an inflatable boat. But I've never seen them act aggressively towards us. In the past, they've popped some boats with their tusks, but that could be just their curiosity. That's how they get up on things. About 20 years ago, they allowed float planes here, and they landed the float plane, and because the walrus will use their tusks to haul out on ice, and I think they tried to haul out on the float plane, and that didn't work.
Punctured the pontoon.
Let's see. Do walrus have a heck of a... Walrus must have a heck of an immune system to be that close in such huge numbers. Are there ever mass outbreaks of disease? Not yet. I just read something about how out of all the pinnipeds, so that includes sea lions, fur seals, true seals, the otarids, and the phocids. Phocids are being the true seals. Otarids are the eared seals, and then walrus are the otobenus. They are the least affected by parasites, and to my knowledge, there has not been any mass outbreaks of disease. Brucellosis? Brucellus?
No.
There's
that one.
They can carry brucellosis, which moose can get and cows can get. I'll write that down. I'll look into that further, but right now I'm thinking that their disease isn't their main problem. I think they had been hunted to extinction 2 separate times, and
not to extinction, near extinction.
Near extinction. Hunted to near extinction. Is there an odor on the beach from the walruses? Yes. Have you ever been in a rose garden?
It's not like that.
It's wonderful. How would you describe it?
It's really animal-y.
Animal-y. Go on.
Yeah, it's strong and musky.
It's very strong. From our vantage points on the cliffs, you can't smell it that bad. It's like you have to get onto the beach. You have to get into it. So we have a question. What happened to our outhouse this winter? It got blown over. We had some incredible winds this winter, and the outhouse didn't make it. That's the old outhouse, not our composting toilet. The archaeologists told us that we can't dig any more holes because we're exposing too many archaeological artifacts, and so we've constructed this really fancy composting toilet. If you come out as a visitor, you can check it out. Oh wait, these are so we do have a link to recordings on the I'm sorry. So backing up to the animal noise, the walrus noise, if you go to the Alaska Department of Fish and Game website for Pacific walrus, there's a species tab, and if you click on Pacific walrus, there's a link to a recording. And yeah, that's pretty good. And it looks like this is our final question. Were the foxes introduced to Round Island from the mainland? I guess, are you asking? They weren't introduced by humans, and I think they're able to move from island to island by the ice pack. Unless they were here when there was no water a few thousand years ago. But most likely they traveled over by ice. And I think we had an Arctic fox on the island one year, which probably came over on the ice. And the red fox are a lot bigger than Arctic foxes and have zero tolerance for Arctic foxes. So he didn't make it. Or she. Well, thanks so much for tuning in. Gorgeous sunset this morning. Thanks, guys, for taking those photos. We're not up at 4, so that's really helpful. Let me just check in with our technical advisor, and I think we're good to go. So, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Anything you'd like to add?
No, that was fun. Good questions.